Hello and welcome to the meditation conversation. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and today I'm so happy to be joined by Jake Sasseville. Jake is a serial media, music, and hospitality entrepreneur, an author, and a podcaster. He is the CEO and founder of Imaloa Institute in Costa Rica, and he was the youngest host in late night TV history on ABC. And the White House named him one of the most innovative entrepreneurs under 30. So I'm so delighted that you're here today, Jake. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kara. I think, the name of the podcast really speaks for itself, and it's important that we're having conversations like these, and I'm really excited to have it. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to see how you got to where you are because I know that things like meditation and spiritual development are very important to you. But the background that I gave on you, there's been so much early success and it's been, very, in the entertainment industry and so forth. So I can't wait to see how that all goes together. But um, talk about your early successes and how those came about.
Yeah, I would say that from a very young age, I um, wanted to be what I thought was successful. I grew up in a poor mill town in the middle of Maine, along the Androscoggin River, and my parents were two beautiful working class people who, I mean, beautiful. I don't know if they were beautiful, but they were working class people, and they tried real
They're
hard.
great people.
Right, yeah, that's right. They didn't get it right all the time. And so much of my adult journey has been okay with saying, yeah, they didn't get it right the whole time. They tried hard, but they didn't get it right. Whereas in the past, I would say, well, they did the best that they could. And kind of as I've learned to be more authentic through my practice of meditation with myself and with the world, I've just been more truthful in what was and what so it makes things a little easier. Anyways, I grew up in Maine and I experienced early childhood challenges. I would say some might even say trauma that really kind of sculpted my desire to be successful because I thought, oh boy, if I'm successful, then I'll be able to deal with everything that happened to me as a kid. And nothing like well, anyways, I mean, people will determine whether or not it's anything major. But like, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's very early on. My brother died of cancer. My mother was an alcoholic. So bing, bang,
Wow.
boom. It's like
Yeah,
those
that's a
things
lot.
that happen as early teens and into mid-teens will cause people to do a variety of things. For me, what it caused is the desire for success. Because, like I said, I thought it could fill the hole. I thought it could fill the hole. So I was a magician in my teen years, if you can imagine, and I was so set on making money because I saw how challenging and how poor of a relationship my parents had with making money, or anyone who made money. It was just a weird relate. I grew up in the middle of Maine, where it's considered not a badge of honor, but actually a pretty bad thing if you're well-to-do or wealthy or whatever it is. Even those words "well-to-do," I remember that's from my childhood. In any case, so I was a magician. I traveled around the Northeast at like 14 years old. I was making $300-400 an hour, which again, huge for where I'm from. I was just so set on it, yeah. And I was recruited by or scouted by the Tonight Show when I was 15 or 16 or something. Started a TV show, and that TV show started locally on a local access TV station that I did in my spare time with my high school friends. And that's the
Was it
show
called
that
Wayne's World? No.
it was not called Wayne's World, but it felt like it. It felt like Wayne's World had a baby with Oprah. I thought I could like have these meaningful conversations and also be crazy at the same time. And that was my life for a long time. And I launched that show, went from local TV to ABC after Jimmy Kimmel. I had this whole Jake After Jimmy campaign. I launched in 60 million homes on ABC when I was
That's
21 years old.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, 21. Wow.
Yes. And ironically, that's also when my practice of meditation started as well. I remember I started to, well, I stopped drinking. That was a big thing. I stopped drinking when I was 21. And I
You
just realized,
stopped drinking
can
at
you
21.
imagine? I
That's
was
so interesting, isn't it?
I was drinking like a fish in my teenage years. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
it's just, it was part of the experience. So I stopped that. And the reason why I stopped is because I wanted to create a big life for myself. I was doing all these programs. I was doing the Anthony Robbins program and I was seeking mentors. I've been very fortunate to have mentors all around the world. But I wanted to create a pure life of success, not a, and I was just dancing on bars all night and then going to school in the morning and then taping my show in the afternoon. And I said, is this really what life is going to be for me? So the moment I stopped drinking, first of all, I lost a lot of almost all my friends from those days, but I started gaining new ones and new mentors. And there was one in particular in London, Susie Pearl. Yes, her name is Susie Pearl. And she was a PR exec for like Madonna and Michael Jackson. And she would invite me to her house. I was like 19, 20, 21. And I remember she had a library, the most beautiful library. And there was a Paul McKenna meditation CD. Paul McKenna is a hypnotherapist in the UK, but he had a meditation CD. And I said, what's meditation? And that started my journey with meditation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. So what happened to turn your attention to Costa Rica? And I mean, that would have been it sounds like that was a turning point, the sobriety and then learning even what meditation is, but kind of getting your toe into that world. But at some point, it seems like your focus really shifted to spiritual development and subsequently focusing on Costa Rica.
Yeah, I would say, sometimes for those who are listening, when you stumble upon a modality, meditation, whatever it might be, another practice, sometimes it takes years of being with that practice before it starts to make the real tectonic shifts in one's life. And that was certainly the case for me. I may have found meditation, I may have zoned out for 20 minutes and encountered a whole new world, but I'll be damned if I was just going to give up everything and go to live in a jungle, or whatever those people do. So there was a lot of reconciling. It wasn't like an immediate shift. All through my 20s, I continued to hustle. I continued to rev my ego. And it was around 27, 28. I had lost everything in Hurricane Sandy. My house was washed away in New York City.
Oh, I'm
All my
sorry.
TV. It's okay. I call it my divine quarter. It's when things just literally washed away. All my TV contracts, all my earning, all my friends. Life was not sustainable the way that I was living it. The high highs and the low lows of, running fast and revving the ego. And I went to a Buddhist monastery. And this is to answer your question of how life started to shift for me. I went to this Buddhist monastery in upstate New York, Port Jarvis, if I remember correctly. And obviously, I was seeking something. I don't even know if I knew what I was seeking then, but I decided to let go and let God and go to this monastery. And I remember the monks were all out that weekend. I went with my friend who said, this is going to be great. And the monks were all out. They were on some seminar or something. There was one monk there. His name was Dorku, Kelsang Dorku. And I went on a 3-day pilgrimage with this 80-year-old monk. And I had never meditated to that degree. I mean, that was like 3-4 hours a day, barely eating anything. I was like, this is insane. I like to eat. I live in New York City. What is this? For me, meditating was always something I did in order to get something rather than just to be.
Mm.
And so a year later, if you can imagine, a year later, I didn't keep in touch with Dorku. I didn't keep in touch with him. A year later, he reads a blog post that I wrote about losing my house, losing the NBC deal, whatever it was. And he wrote me an email, Kara, and it was the most, and I remember it. I remember the email to this day because it struck me so deeply and it set my life on a whole different course. He said, my dear Jacob, I didn't even know he read my blog or kept in touch with me. My dear Jacob, in your recent blog post about losing your deal with NBC, I count 22 uses of the words I and my in the blog post. Remember, it is our self-cherishing ego that is the root of all our suffering. And finally, please don't ever forget that our lives are fulfilled in direct proportion to the care and concern we have for others. Love, Dorku. And he died the next day, Kara. He died the
Oh my
next day,
God.
which I was shocked. This is why I
Wow.
decided to remember the email. I was like, this was prophetic. This was prophetic. And so I made my life slowly. Again, these things don't change fast, or at least they didn't for me. Maybe they do for others who are quantum leaping and all of this. But slowly, I started to move my life in the direction of human beings. Slowly, I started it, not to be about I and my, but about we and them. And that's why Imaloa in Costa Rica, our leadership tenant is to serve from a spirit of service and a posture of learning. How do we do this from behind rather than thinking that we need to lead out front? And so over the years after that email, and after a lot of learnings, I moved to Maui. I created this beautiful home in Maui where people started enjoying coming to Maui and enjoying friends of friends. My house just would fill up constantly with people. And I realized people want to feel at home in their transformation. So, never having been to a retreat before, never having even thought about it, I had done yoga, but not a yoga retreat. I have an Ashtanga yoga practice. I started in Maloa based on this human need that I saw that people need to feel at home in their transformation. Retreat centers didn't seem to be doing it. Hotels certainly weren't doing it. So that's why I created Imaloa. And then a year later, or whatever it was, 6 months after talking about this vision, we raised the money. Me and an ex-business partner of mine raised the money, and we started what became Imaloa. And now it's arguably one of the most successful retreat centers, you know, at least in Costa Rica. And we're expanding to 7 different continents over the next 5 years. So it's an intercontinental institute for the education and advancement of human beings. And it really started with that Dorku email and how our lives are fulfilled in direct proportion to the care and concern we have for others. Yeah. I
Wow.
hope
That's
that's not too
beautiful.
long of an answer.
Of course not.
Okay, good.
How so when did you start Imaloa?
June 1st, 2018 is when we
Okay.
bought the property. I had started it probably 2 years before in my head, right?
In
Because a
Maui
big
or
belief that I have
oh,
is,
okay.
yeah, our word creates our world. So I had to talk about it in order to make it come, it had to I didn't just be like, okay, I have $3.5 million. Let's start a retreat center. It took time to
Yeah.
raise the money and to envision it. But I moved to Costa Rica. We closed on the property that became Imaloa June 1st, 2018. So about 4.5 years.
Wow, that's great. And then, of course, so you were what, about coming up to 2 years when things shut down. I don't know how that affected Costa Rica.
So Costa Rica's borders closed on March 18th, 2020. I'll never forget it. I almost had a full blown panic attack meltdown. Not only because the borders were shutting, but because we had 32 contracts, like upcoming contract. Like we were sold, not out. We weren't sold out of 2020, but we had a lot of upcoming retreats because I had researched the market. I figured out what our unique differentiators were. I hired great coaches. We had a great team. Boom. Our first retreat was 3 months after we closed on the property. I mean, we scaled very quickly. And I think that's just a testimony really to the vision and to the team that when a vision is big enough and when the team is just treated like the royalty that we all should be treating our teams, uh, amazing things, magical things happen. Anyways, COVID came, the pandemic came. And, in hindsight, we were not in hindsight, this is a reality. We were the only hospitality business not to shut and not to fire a soul during COVID, despite the borders being shut for everybody for 7 months. We reduced all of our salaries. To 10% of what we were making, but we didn't shut down. And let me tell you something, the minute the world opened back up, and what I mean by the world is the Costa Rican borders, we had a competitive edge like no one else in the market because everyone had said, oh, we're done. We're shutting down until this thing is over. I was like, oh, heck, no, we're not. And we were the only, my team would come in April and May of 2020. Kara, this is true. They looked like they had just seen a ghost, the Costa Ricans. I said, guys, what's wrong? They're like, Jake, we're the only ones in our town to have a job. We are the only ones in our town. Like this is not a testimony of me, by the way. I mean, I have some very gracious investors, and we took on some debt, but we did what we had to do to look out for those that we cared most about, which is our team. And this is where our core values came into front and center for us, because it's like, what were we going to choose? What path were we going to choose? That's what we chose.
Wow. And then then you guys were able to take off, like, once things opened up again, it was fairly seamless, it sounds like.
Well, it was, I, so it was not easy. I lost the CEO and COO of Imaloa, my two business partners, during COVID. They stepped down. They didn't, it wasn't COVID. They stepped down. They stepped out of the business because it was a plane that was careening toward a mountain. I mean, that's really
Yeah.
what it was. So they were like, heck no. And I was like, oh, yes, this is where it gets good, because I knew if we could survive, I knew, Kara, that if we could survive, we would be a safe haven for people who would be asking some of life's biggest questions. And that's what we've become. We pivoted during COVID. We became a long-term live and work space. So you could come and live, eat, sleep at Imaloa, gourmet food, great community, unbelievable nature, and you could work from there because we had great fiber optic internet. So we did that for 7 months. And then, yeah, when the world opened up, we began booking retreats, and it was tricky. It was really tricky. I did not want to be CEO of Imaloa. I resisted it. I said no 3 times. I was the sales guy, but something got me. Something shifted inside my heart on the third time that the lead investor called me and said, you have to take it over or else we need to sell this place. And I was like, okay, I got it. I stayed in it for the team. I care a whole lot about this team and about the vision of what I thought we could create if we could make it through.
Mm. Well, it's amazing. I mean, I have like my little minor version of what you had,
Yeah, tell
because
me.
only in terms of the retreat, because I was hosting my very first retreat locally. So I'm in Indiana, and I just kind of my own accord found a place kind of in the country, or in the woods basically. And I had my first retreat that I was looking forward to, and it was March 13th to 15th,
Oh,
2020.
oh,
And I had all my bags packed, like all the retreat stuff, all my
of
candles and
course.
incense, and my salt light, my Himalayan salt light candles, and all of that, um, packed up by my garage door, like ready to be loaded into the car. And I had participants calling me, like, "Are we still doing this?" And the owner of where we were staying, she's like, what do you think? And I'm like, I think we still go. Like, I kept, all day long, I'm like, I think we need to still keep going. And that very day, this was like a Thursday, I think. Yeah, it was a Thursday. I mean, schools were starting to close, but it was all happening in one day. It was like, then
Yes.
Disney World closed. And I was like, Disney World closed? And then the NBA closed. And I'm like, the NBA
Remember
closed?
when the NBA closed? That was big.
Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, these are really big, big corporations. And I'm like, they're okay. So then that really made me like, okay, well, who am I? Why would I think that my people are going to be safe when everybody else is retreating? And they're like, no, we've got to stay home, stay home. And I'm like, why would I then be like, think that, my people would be safe, you know? So then I had to make the last minute call, and it was like, I mean, but it was really in the 11th hour. Like, I mean, I was packed, literally everything packed and ready to go. And then I had to individually call people and
Oh, it's the hardest. I mean, to deal with clients at that time was so hard because many were paid in full. It's not cheap to host at Imaloa. I mean, I totally feel whatever level it was, whether it was you having to call participants or us having to deal with folks like you, like clients, it was really tricky. What ended up happening with your retreat?
I postponed it. So I did do it in August at the
Cool.
same place, which it didn't feel like that much later. But looking back, I'm like, wow, that really wasn't that long before I was able to have it. And it was great.
Good.
But it was one of the first things where people were kind of all together, for all the people who were there. And so it's funny to look back and be like, yeah, we were really tiptoeing around each other, and everything was outside. because it was August, so we were able to be outside, and we were really like praying for the weather, like, and the weather was incredible. So
Hmm.
we were very fortunate under the circumstances, and but it was so funny because it was a meditation retreat, and we were all trying to set it up so that it was really nurturing our spirits. And um but the place where I hosted it, they were kind of a motorcycle destination,
Hmm.
because they were in the hills, in the beautiful countryside, and because things were just starting to open up, and there weren't a lot of places where motorcycle groups could go. They That was like a destination for a lot of people to like take their motorcycle on the weekend and go hang out at this hotel, or it was like this little country inn,
Hmm.
with different outbuildings and stuff. But they had a bar, and like a little bar and grill. And so it was a very funny contrast, because we
Huh.
were able to be off, in this barn area that was really beautiful. But then when we needed to eat, we'd go to this bar and grill, and then there were like all these, bikers, and then a lot of people who were just there to like let loose.
Hmm.
And it was just very funny
It was a
because
weird time.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was this
like we
interesting
were
time when humanity. It's like I've not done ayahuasca, the plant medicine from the Amazon ayahuasca,
I'm
but
shocked if you haven't done it and you're in Costa Rica.
I know everybody. It's the whole thing. I just when everyone says zig, I go zag. But I had many friends who said the world was collectively going through an ayahuasca journey. Um, in that time, because everything that was normal suddenly wasn't, and yet for me, I got to see people for who they really were, Kara. And that was really powerful because I was disillusioned, even though I'm a pretty smart person and pretty intuitive. I still allowed myself to be disillusioned by certain folks. And I feel like COVID also really lifted those veils too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were definitely there have been gifts in it, and it's been and yeah, I mean I haven't had ayahuasca either, but I can see that, that parallel between that type of experience and what, the collective has been going through for a couple of years.
The
It's funny to
purging, the
look
purging. Yeah.
right. And it's funny to look back on it, and now we look back and we know how it works out. It's like, oh, well, of course, like, of course you wouldn't have your retreat because the whole thing closed down for a long time. And
Yeah.
then it would open up, and then it would close down again, depending on where you were. Um, and it was, such a slow reintegration, and it's such a slow process of coming out of that, which we now know that even, I mean, things are more or less, at least to a new normal now, but it just depends. I mean, I still go out and I'll still see people in masks and things like that. So there's still like vestiges of it. But looking back, we have the gift of hindsight, where it's like, well, yeah, of
Mm.
course, everything closed down. So of course you would have, that's how it was for a lot of things. But when you were going through it, it's like, this is so weird, like
And we
really
have
bizarre.
that collect. It's interesting you talk about the gift of hindsight because it's a it's probably for the first and only time in our lifetimes, and maybe even in generations. Although maybe our grandparents' generation in World War II, 1945 was obviously that day in 1945 was a big day. It's interesting because it's a collective. We all get to look back and experience that, like, and we all get to pinpoint, okay, you were in Indiana doing your retreat, I was in Costa Rica, and we were just ending a retreat, and we didn't know we wouldn't have another retreat again for a year, like all these things that, and yet we can all trace it back to a certain time period and how we felt, and it was collectively shared, and now it's a collective hindsight. Very rare to be able to do that. I mean, you and I probably live very different lives in Indiana and Costa Rica, and yet here we are unified by these moments. And it really goes to show like that. This is why for me COVID was particularly striking, and the pandemic was striking, because it showed us our common humanity in front of us, and continues to, if we listen to it, how in sync we actually are, that we're more same than separate, all of these things.
Right, right, absolutely. So I know that you're learning a lot about business and culture in terms specifically about Costa Rica, and you're working on striving toward equality in your international team. And I was really
Hmm.
interested to read about that. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for those who haven't done business or haven't been to Costa Rica, it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. Some of the loveliest people, doesn't matter their socioeconomic background, whether they're wealthy or not. Their motto is pura vida, which in Spanish means pure life. And so instead of saying hello and goodbye, they say pura vida. So imagine you're in the street in the grocery store getting gas and everyone's saying pure life, pure life, pure life. Um, so it's a really remarkable um, it's a remarkable place to be, and yet there are huge amounts of inequities. Um, the minimum wage for many of the type of work that we employ, many of the type of team members that we employ, is five, six, $700 a month, according to government standards for those in the hospitality business. And Costa Rica is not a cheap country. It's actually quite expensive for Central America. It's quite expensive to live here. And so this inequity really bothered me. And in fact, I had local Costa Ricans, those who were business owners, indigenous Costa Ricans, wealthy indigenous Costa Ricans, tell me that I shouldn't pay $1 more because that's what they get paid. And otherwise, it'll cause it to be difficult for other business owners, like wild things. When I first moved here, I was like, what? Because I wanted to pay everybody more. I thought this was crazy to pay people $600 a month, and to see that even Costa Ricans themselves were not advocating for their people to be lifted up. And it's not about the money, although it's a big part about the money. For me, it was about creating a sense of hope and curiosity about what's possible in the world, and that could be intergenerationally impactful. And it's not the same in the States. It's not the same. It's The States is very capitalistic in its approach. This is very pure. This is a very different. I mean, it's capitalistic as well. Don't get me wrong, but it's less interesting to address these inequities in a place like the States, which is so harbored with and plagued by so many different cultural challenges, um, from racial to economic to religious. And for me, it's much more enjoyable to contribute in this way here. So, there are certain steps that we've taken and are taking. One of the things I'm really proud of is our general manager, who's Costa Rican, and our director of sales, who's from Southern California. They make the same amount of money, same job, same, one's a woman, one's a male, but they make the same amount. That is an amazing feat that I bet very few businesses in Costa Rica can say, especially if they're employing and working with local Costa Ricans. So that's just one specific example, but it's also about, doing a minimum thriving wage, like this minimum wage business. We pay everybody 30 to 50% plus more than what we're required to pay them. And we do that as close to day one as possible. And again, it's not about the money as much as it is about creating the possibility and being able to just stand apart from how business has been done for many years here and how many people still are doing it. And then there's training and personal and professional development, things that you would never see at a hospitality business for a team of housekeepers or assistant general managers. You just would never see it. And yet we've hired world-class coaches to come in and work with our people. And so there's several different things that we're trying to do that make life a little easier and a little better, and that have an intergenerational impact, so that they get to teach their kids, team members who are having kids, they get to teach their kids that there's a different way, rather than how gringos, essentially white people who come in and start these things oftentimes, say that it has to be, that they get to see a different way. They get to see it modeled differently. And that's pretty special. I appreciate you asking me about that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Beautiful. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit about Grandma's basement. Can you tell us about this and who grandma was
What a
really?
time. A literal woman, a woman that lived once upon a time. She actually died this year. Bless grandma. So, I told you that house got washed away in Hurricane
Yeah.
Sandy. And
Hmm.
so, and all my contracts, and like I literally hit a dark night of the soul. I smacked up against the wall of a dark night of the soul, and it was hard. And I had no place to go. And I was flying high in New York, and I had to go back to Maine, which I resisted because I didn't want to go back because there's just a lot of pain there, right? If there's a lot of pain where you're from and you haven't dealt with it, it's hard to go back. So I had to face my greatest fear. My aunt wouldn't take me in. My mom was drinking. My dad, was very much into his Parkinson's disease journey. The only place I could go was grandma's. And grandma said, you can have the basement. And the basement was an unfinished basement, probably 10 by 10. Had a little window out back, little window to see the beautiful backyard. I loved that backyard. And it was the only house that had been a constant in my life for my whole life, 27 years up to that point. And I resisted the first year of being in that basement, Kara. I just couldn't deal with it. I had to, my phone stopped ringing. I started and failed at 5 businesses. The sixth one, which was a podcast, actually worked. But it was a full blown surrender and in the dark night of the soul. And I got into a 12-step program. I would go for 3, 4, 5 hour walks a day in the woods. Um, I had no money in my bank account for a year. Grandma put food in the fridge. She gave me her 2004 gold Jetta and put gas in the car for me so that I could have some sense of normalcy. Everyone told me, why don't I just get a job? Meanwhile, I'm starting and failing at 5 businesses, which is a little bit harder than a job application because I was trying to be true to myself in the face of all this fear and uncertainty. And after the first year, I started to accept what I could not change. I started to learn to live life on life's terms. I started to be okay with if I was in grandma's basement for the rest of my life. I started to not go back to New York City on my friend's dime so that I could experience the thrill of the city, but rather just be in that basement, be in the nature, be in life, live life on life's terms instead of always trying to create some result. Instead, to really look at how I could be and just take action from wherever it is I was. So this is what that basement started to teach me. It was deeply moved. It was profound. It was a profound 2 years of my life. And, life started to work again for me after the second year once I really surrendered. And I learned how to create from a place of surrender instead of hustle. And creating from a place of surrender allows us to listen to the whispers of life. Our life is always speaking to us. We just need to be quiet enough to be able to listen. And I was never quiet enough. I was never quiet enough. Even with all my meditation practices and my gurus and my mentor relationships, I still wasn't quieting my mind. And grandma's basement forced me into quieting my mind. So the sixth business, like I said, worked. It was a podcast. I started it in 2014. I just called it the Jake Sasseville Show. And what I decided to do is I made a podcast really as a living amends to those who I had hurt in my 20s, because you don't end up without a house, without contracts, without friends if you're not hurting people along the way. And I was a hustler. I was hustling. And so the podcast was interviewing people that had never done podcasts before in 2013, 14, that were pretty well known or interesting at the very least. And it was in being service to them to get their message out there in a beautiful way that they could be proud of. And that podcast went from 0 to 100,000 downloads in like a month. And I ended up leveling off at 250,000 downloads a month for 300 episodes, whatever it was. I was making 8, 9, 10, 12 grand a month after just 3 months of doing the show. I mean, things you just don't hear about in podcasts. And I was taping the whole damn show from Dunkin' Donuts parking lot because grandma didn't have internet in her basement. So the whole thing is just like crazy to reflect on, but also, you know, really important because I'm sure that even though many of your listeners probably aren't in grandma's actual basement, grandma's basement was a place for me, but it's a way of it's a way of mind, it's a way of thinking, it's an experience, it's a life pause, it's a dark night of the soul, it's all of these things that again we share in our common humanity but don't actually give credence to, that we're each going through it in different ways right now. And so that's why I love talking about grandma and grandma's basement. And God bless her, she loved living with me for those 2 years. She really did. I loved her so much. She was my little travel buddy. Went back when when I could afford to travel before Grandma's Basement.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, a sweet immigrant lady from Canada, and just provided that safe space. And now for so many, Imaloa in Costa Rica is that safe space of home. And it's an homage to Grandma in a way. Like, people are really touched and transformed by the week or 2 weeks they get at Imaloa. It's very moving for a lot of people, and it doesn't have to do with the curriculum or me or even the team. What it is often, I think, Kara, is it's a reconnection to nature, because that's what I got in Grandma's Basement. Those hikes, those winter hikes when snow was up to my knees sometimes, 3, 4, 5 hour hikes. I was reconnecting with nature. And now what people are doing, actually, I didn't get this until this conversation with you right now, but what people are doing at Imaloa are reconnecting with nature. So it's kind of an homage and an honoring of Grandma and the safe space she provided me to fall flat on my face. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really powerful. It's so uh it's just beautiful that she was there to catch you, and
Yeah.
then the amazing things that came from Grandma's Basement.
Yeah.
That's incredible success. So that's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Well, how can people find out more about you and about
So
Imaloa?
you got it. You got it. There you go. Emilo. I wasn't going to correct you. It's a lot of vowels. I know. I know it is. If people would like to, they can go to imaloainstitute.com or at imaloa.institute on Instagram. And just for your folks, if they use promo code Jake on any signature retreat, they'll get $350 off. So that's kind of
Wonderful.
nice. Promo code Jake at imaloainstitute.com. Me, I'm on the socials at Jake Sasseville. The show, if they want to tune in, is the Jake Sasseville Show. We just launched our 4th season yesterday or 2 days ago with Gandhi's grandson. So Gandhi's
Is
grandson
this
was,
a podcast
yes,
or
the
what is it?
podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, the Jake Sasseville Show is the podcast. So people can listen in if they want to. But really, if people are like feeling moved, I think learning more about Imaloa and seeing if and how we could serve your people, yeah, they're more than invited to go.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time here today and for the beautiful heart share, and many blessings on your continued journey in Costa Rica.
Thank you, Kara. Thanks for having me.
Beautiful.